All right. We'll just start with some real quick introductions. As I was introduced, the name is Len Bradley. I'm the supervisor of engineering for RGS Associates, licensed professional engineer in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. I'm the governor appointed engineer on the statewide Water Resource Commission. And the most fun of this is I'm actually a certified Kansas City Barbecue Society certified judge. So um, going over to Mark here.
Thanks, Len. Yeah, no barbecue judging in my past, nor in my future, I think. I'm Mark Hackenberg, a registered landscape architect in the state of Pennsylvania, principal at RGS Associates, been practicing in the field of land development consulting for 36 years, about 30 of those with RGS. We're an organization kind of represents private sector clients in southeastern, south central Pennsylvania, 12-14 county area. 4 offices. So generally familiar with the Southeast region and the approval processes, recognizing we have folks from all across the state, and there may be nuances and a little bit of differences as to what we share today, but really interested in doing a little bit deeper dive. I'll be honest and straight up with you. This is largely Len's presentation. I'm here for color commentation, challenging convention, offering some thoughts and ideas and perspectives, but there's a lot that's changed in the land development landscape, as many of you I'm sure are aware. And we're here to kind of focus on a couple of those primary topics. If we can move on, next slide there, Len. Just a quick overview of what we're going to share with you today as it relates to the topics at hand. Land development consulting and land development approval processes have been changing, and most specifically in the realm of stormwater controls and NPDES permitting in response to changing in storm events and even the permitting process, a lot of which is being handed down from the EPA level through our state and local government. So we're going to focus largely on the impacts in along that line of thinking. So Stormwater 101, just kind of an overview, a high level review from Len's perspective. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the NPDES permitting and timelines, things that we're seeing affecting the outcomes of projects for clients and municipal and jurisdictions that we're working within. A little bit about the permit conditions and changes in paperwork, the obligations and new expectations and requirements that are coming down the pike. And also, Len will touch on what's been occurring here between 2019 and 2024 over the last 5 years, and new regulations, new requirements that we're starting to see handed down by DEP. And then we want to make sure we're leaving some time for Q&A. So a little bit about what we're going to tell you. I'm going to let Len go ahead and start to jump into the Stormwater 101 piece.
All right. So we're going to take everyone back to middle school to begin with. Hopefully everyone remembers the hydrologic cycle from all their middle school science classes. But this is fundamentally what we're trying to do, is replicate the normal water cycle with our land development project. So obviously you have rainfall. Rainfall leads to water falling on the ground plane of the earth. It then flows either laterally through infiltration to feed the streams, or overland flow and feeds the wetlands and streams and lakes and things of that nature. Obviously, then you have evaporation and we start the whole cycle over. So how does that translate to land development? Well, when we start looking at raw land, so pre-construction, pre-development, the natural aspect of land there, when we have rainfall, we have roughly about 10% water running off of the surface. So that is the water that is directly tributary to surface waters, lakes, streams, wetlands, things like that. But we're also getting different types of infiltration. We're getting 25% deep infiltration, which is then recharging of our aquifers and water supplies. And then we have that shallow infiltration, which is what you see when you have seeps and springs that are popping up and creating some of the surface features that we have. But normally we're looking at about 10% runoff of rainfall in these normal situations. Now, what happens when we start looking at land development? Well, the minute we start changing the ground cover and putting some type of development on this property, we're going to change the characteristics of runoff. So when we start looking at a normal, say, single twofold, so we're looking at about 38% evapotranspiration, so plant uptake, the combination of both plant uptake and evaporation, fancy term, evapotranspiration. But about 20% of that water will still run off, and you can see that the infiltration, both shallow and deep, is significantly reduced. As we start getting more dense developments, obviously it's all proportional. So we're going to start having more runoff, less evapotranspiration, and again, less deep infiltration. You'll notice that the shallow infiltration is reducing, but not as much as the deep aquifer recharging. And that's because some of that water is still moving. It's still hitting some of the geotechnical layers and or compacted layers and pushing that to the streams. But again, when we're talking 35 to 50%, you can see that roughly 30% of the rainfall is now considered runoff that we're going to have to manage so we don't damage downstream properties or downstream infrastructure. So we start getting into the highly urbanized areas like the downtown, Lancaster, Philly, Harrisburg, things like that. We start having a lot of runoff. So now all of a sudden we have 55% of our runoff, of our rainfall, into runoff. And now you can see that both shallow and deep infiltration are extremely limited. So we have an absolute large amount of water that we have to manage. So one of the parts of land development we start looking at, we have multiple municipal approvals and state level authorizations that we have to go through.
Yeah, so generally what we're dealing with through the entitlement process is local zoning codes. We're managing development and the entitlement process through subdivision land development, stormwater management plan compliance, as Len's suggesting. You know, each of these changes in cover conditions occurs through municipal approval process. Um, what I can tell you is that over the years, this is probably the one space, and others who've probably worked in this field as long as I have, the one place we've seen substantive changes has really been related to the floodplain, stormwater management and permitting process. So Len's going to take us down a path of the NPDES permitting modifications and changes, and we'll take a little bit deeper dive in that space. Len?
So when we talk about NPDES, you know, what does it actually mean? So NPDES is just an acronym. It's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It is a federal program. There's actually 15 different types of NPDES permits. Most land development projects focus on what we call in Pennsylvania the PAGO2. It's our designation for a construction or stormwater runoff permit. So what does a PAGO2 or a construction NPDES permit regulate? Well, after one or two regulations, say water. In the most broad, easy to understand definition, it says no water quality or volume of stormwater project. Drinking water standards here. We're talking about aquatic life sustainability within the surface water. So we're worried about the fish, the insects, things like that, that the water quality is such that they can still flourish and live in our the surface waters that we have here in the Commonwealth. And we talk about volume, just drastically the amount, the quantity of water running off of your project site is what the regulations will regulate. So in Pennsylvania, and hopefully anyone born in the 80s earlier understands the pictures, we have the three amigos here of stormwater regulations or stormwater divisions here for NPDES permitting. So if you are 0 to less than 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance, you are not required to get an NPDES permit. There's nothing required at a state or federal level. On a municipal level, there are typically exemptions for land development that minor. However, it's one of those things you're going to want to check the specific municipal ordinance to see what regulations or requirements there are to obtain a building permit. Anytime you are greater than, or you're 5,000 square feet, but less than an acre, what's required on a state and federal level is what's called an ENS narrative. It is just actually, it's called a narrative, but it's a plan. You don't have to have it approved. You don't have to seek any type of approval from the Conservation District or DEP, but you have to have a plan on how you're going to manage erosion potential and erosion reduction from your site. And typically at this point, you do have some type of municipal stormwater approval, whether it is a minor stormwater permit or a major permit, depending on the township or something like that. But there is typically something on a municipal level that you need to seek approval for. And when you get over 1 acre, guess what? You're now in the federal and state NPDES permit program. You do need a permit. And I would say almost definitely most municipalities are going to require some type of stormwater approval. So there are different types of NPDES permits here in Pennsylvania. The newest one, created in 2019, is what we call the PAGO1. It is our first small project NPDES permit. To qualify for that, you have to be under 5 acres of earth disturbance, and you cannot discharge to an impaired waters. Every stream in Pennsylvania has a designation of both existing and proposed designated use. So long as you are not an impaired waterway or special protection waterway, you could potentially qualify for that. But for the larger projects over 5 acres, generally speaking, you're going to be in a general permit. So this means there's no special conditions. It's just a standard project. It's anywhere from 1 acre, potentially up to 100 acres or whatever. So long as you meet all the criteria for that, you don't have any soil conditions or soil contamination on your site and special protection waters. These are covered under the PAGO2 authorization. They will have a PAC in the permit number. So if you are purchasing a project or looking at obtaining a project for your land development that already has NPDES approval, you can easily tell what type of permit it has by the actual designation on the permit itself. So if it's a PAC, it is a general permit. If you get a PAD permit, the next one is an individual permit. These are more complex projects. So if you do injection wells, if you do a floodplain restoration, or you have special protection waterways like high quality or exceptional value wetlands on your projects, you're going to be an individual permit or discharge to them. These can carry special conditions and requirements. So under a general permit, all general permits have the same permit conditions throughout the state, regardless of the project. Individual permits have a baseline conditions of your permit, but then you could have special provisions like monitoring of wetlands, monitoring of water quality, submitting annual logs to DEP, things like that. They can put special requirements on your projects if it is an individual permit.
Len, if I could just interject, if you just roll back to that slide for a second, one of the things that I can suggest and just offer to the engineering community and design professionals is look closely very early in your projects as to whether or not you're contributing to impaired waterways. There have been changes to waterway designations in recent years. We've had a number of small projects that we thought were relatively innocuous, no big deal. Come to find out, you start to get into the design and review process that you're contributing to an impaired waterway, and all of a sudden you're heading down a path of an individual permit. Just a piece of advice: it's worth checking that early and often.
Yeah, and just know that the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission can change designations of trout streams on a monthly basis
Yeah,
with
which
no
is
notification.
why I say often.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so check them often, especially right before you submit, to make sure that you're still compliant with that. So through the NPDES permitting process, there are multiple milestones. I'm not going to read through them, but up front, when we go through design, a lot of clients ask, how long is it going to take? Well, before we actually get the permit, what we have to do is have a pre-application meeting where we kind of have the design about 80% figured out. We meet with the regulators, we talk through it, make sure there's nothing they want to see in that. And then we submit our notice of intent, which is our permit application. We then go through what's called administratively complete process, where they make sure we have all the documentation that they need to review. And then we go through technical review and approval. Mark, the first question we always get from clients is,
How long?
how long is it going to take?
Yeah, how long? And honestly, it's a loaded question. It really depends. There's so many influences in the design and approval process that these are just generalities that we tend to share with clientele. That in those early stages, you've got a month to 3 months of just going through conceptual design, pre-app meetings, and the initial design and submission process. The administrative process generally pretty straightforward, and where you kind of the rubber meets the road is in that technical review, and you're going back and forth. Generally, 2 reviews. You're working through most of your issues with your conservation districts, but that again, I think most of the design professionals on the call would also challenge that notion that can vary depending on the reviewer that you get and what the issues might become. So now we're in the space of even interpretation of current regulations, where we're seeing differences in perspective between conservation districts and their latest interpretations. So owners never want to hear it, but it is one of the unknowns, and one of the biggest challenges in the consulting world is to be predictive around this process.
So the other parts of that is, once we get the NPDES permit in hand, we then have some certain obligations, one of which is legal document recording for the PCSM. We then have the construction, the professional oversight. And then once you're done all of the construction, we have to go through with the termination of the permit. So we have a notice of termination, a submission, a formal submission to the conservation district to close out the permit. Once they accept that, we then move into a PCSM long-term operation and maintenance time frame here. So what we're going to be talking about primarily in the back half of this is what are the requirements of these areas that are highlighted in blue here, and what has changed here since about 2019 to current day, and what do we expect here to happen in 2025 and moving forward? So what's happened since 2020, since 2012? Well, like I said, in 2012, there was a legislative change. So we have adopted changes to our state law, which required these, and there were new permit conditions associated with that. So we had a legal law change in 2012. So nothing we can do about that. There's no argument. The law is the law now. So what did that say? Well, I'm not going to read these verbatim. These are the actual words of the permit condition and the PA code. What this says is that anytime that you have a permit issued, you have 45 days from the date of the issuance of the permit to record the legal documents that are required as an instrument that will run with the property in perpetuity, that requires the stormwater management I'll say BMP, best management practice. So stormwater management facility, a best management practice. They're required to remain on the site and to be kept in a fashion with maintenance that they still function as designed and approved on the permit. So they can't go anywhere. It has to be there. But you as a permittee, you as doing land development, you need to know that you have 45 days to record that document. There are special circumstances where DEP or the Conservation District will let you extend that. However, the general permit condition is 45 days. So what is required? DEP has done everyone a great service here by giving us some of the templates for these documents. Now, I will tell you right now, these documents are currently in revision with the central office. They're going to be making some revisions to these based on some feedback from both developers and the regulators. But generally speaking, you're going to have a DEP instrument. This instrument is pretty much an easement and a restriction and covenant on the property. There are standard language up here that they give you, and there are generally speaking 4 appendices. So Appendix A is we actually have to record the post-construction plan. Appendix B is the landowner notification. We'll talk through that. C is the O&M plan. Typically, that's included in the PCSM plan, so we just make a reference to the PCSM plan there. And D is for, let's just say you have one entity that owns a condo association, or you're doing a land condo for a commercial property. If you are not going to be the responsible party doing the operation and maintenance of your stormwater, let's say you sign a third-party agreement with some property management company to do that, this is where Appendix D would come in. You would actually transfer the responsibility from the landowner and or permittee to a third party. So that's what that can accomplish. So what does the landowner notification say? The landowner notification, it just says, hey, look, you as the person purchasing this land, there is a stormwater BMP on this property. This is what the stormwater BMP is, and this is what you are required to do from a maintenance perspective. And here is kind of the legal references to that. So that is what the landowner notification looks like. We'll get into when you do that. So whenever someone sells a property, let's just say you sell a property that has a stormwater management BMP on it, best management practice or stormwater control measure, depending on who you ask with some of the changing terminology now. If you sell a parcel, the person selling the parcel or transferring the parcel is required to provide within 45 days a notice that the property was transferred. So again, something to think about with your settlement teams. If you're a developer that does your own settlements, make sure that your closing team, in their closing documents, they know that after settlement, they have 45 days to give notification to the conservation district that the parcel has changed hands. Some of the common issues, and this is since 2012 when this became a in the law to do this with these instruments. We've had a lot of clients, and there's been horror stories out here of home builders that, you start a project, it's 5-10 years down the road, you're finally ready to close that project out, and the property has sold 2 or 3 times. So now you're talking to a 3rd generation owner of the property, and you don't have that auto notification signed. And you're like, well, I can't submit. The conservation just like, well, I don't have a Appendix B for this parcel, and you have a stormwater BMP in there. I can't close your permit. You have to go back and get this signed that they acknowledge that there's a BMP on the project or on their property. And there's been horror stories of homeowners having to build decks or finish basements or whatever just to get these people to sign the one page piece of paper. So one potential solution is one thing that we recommend to all of our clients is, one, to include Appendix B within all your closing documents. or your initial purchase agreement at the time they put a deposit down on the house. So even before settlement. The other way you can get around this is you can put in your HOA documents that any member of the HOA, i.e. a landowner within the association, is required to sign any and all NPDES paperwork within a certain duration without compensation. That way you then have some teeth to go back to those landowners and that you're not paying to finish their basement to get them to sign a piece of paper 3 years down the road.
Yeah, Len, this is one of the challenges. Those of us who've been in this industry for a long time, there was a day when these requirements didn't exist, and the individual property owners, the developers, the guy who subdividing the 3-4 properties off of his farm. These are the challenges that those individuals now face, and I want to say we're better off for it. Uh, I want to say that. Sometimes I question that, but
Yeah,
these are the challenges of today's land development
yeah.
environment.
And remember, a lot of these criteria, these conditions are buried in, you're going to get, when you get your permit, you get a 10-page document. And these conditions are just laid out in the back. And sometimes if you're not reading those, you don't know about those until 5 years down the road when you're trying to close the permit. So very important to read the permits. Luckily, I'm a glutton for punishment, and I have read all of the stuff right now for the general permit conditions. So I'm happy to kind of shine a light on these for everyone here in the presentation. So another common issues that we get is that the purchasers are unaware that there are on-lot stormwater facilities. Well, guess what? If you have them sign Appendix B at the purchase agreement period, they would know that. But also that the sales staff doesn't necessarily articulate that when they're talking to people who want to purchase a property. So one thing that we do for clients, and I recommend you guys talk to your engineers in your project, is one, we can do a lot fits. So every time they want to come in, you can try to figure out exactly if their model will fit on that lot. But we also provide color-coded maps for the sales teams that they know that these specific lots that, hey, when you go to settlement, one, this has a stormwater facility, and two, you're going to have these extra documents in your closing docs for these specific parcels, not all of them, but these specific parcels that are highlighted on the map. So it gives a good visual for the closing staff and closing team to understand. So another common issue, and we'll get into this in a little bit we have a project right now where second generation owner has gone out and put unbeknownst to the home builder, went out and got a permit from the municipality and went out there and put a patio and a pool and all this impervious area on this lot. And guess what? That lot did not have enough impervious area on this approval to accommodate that. Well, now we've submitted an NOT on their behalf, and the conservation district has come back and said it doesn't work because you have more impervious there. So how do you get around that? We'll kind of cover that in some of the 2024 permit changes that have happened here. That DEP heard those concerns as trying to accommodate some of the developers' issues with some of the current changes. So some of the long-term operation and maintenance, some of the best advice I can give you is that, one, you are required to do maintenance per your NPDES permit. However, you also likely have a municipal stormwater management agreement as well that is also requiring this. You need to read both those documents and understand the requirements and the frequency and the associated cost for your performa and kind of seeding the financials of these associations of what all that's going to require. Most municipal agreements, if they don't now, will in the next couple of years because of changes to the MS4 program, their permit with the state, are going to require an annual report to prove that stormwater control measures that have been installed are still there and still functioning in accordance with their approval. So that's going to come. If you're not there already, it will for your municipality. And I will say, if you don't have records, if DEP or the conservation district goes out to your pond, your rain garden or whatever, and it looks pristine, you are obviously maintaining it. However, if you don't have a piece of paper saying that I cut the grass on this date, or I went out and I checked to make sure there was no debris, or I removed sediment on this date, as far as the regulators are concerned, that maintenance never happened. There needs to be documentation of your maintenance. So again, highly recommend that if you're using a landscape company, if you are using a third party and not your staff, or even your staff, make sure they are putting a piece of paper in a file, make sure they're sending an email, make sure they're creating a log of the maintenance activity that was done for each and every stormwater facility. That way, if you're ever audited or questioned by either the municipality or DEP or the conservation district, you have that information, you can provide it to them. Well, guess what? In 2019, Billy Mays here, things changed in 2019. What happened was DEP, although there have not been any regulatory law changes since 2012, DEP, like other government agencies, is updating their checklist, instructions, forms, applications, and preferences, and their standing operating procedures. So they made changes and they changed requirements that are not regulation. They just did this via their documents. So what were those major changes from 2019? So these are things you should already have in your workflow because these have been requirements of general permits and individual permits since 2019. So number one, you have to have a qualified professional do site inspections. So you are required to do weekly inspections. Actually, we'll get kind of into these a little bit. So a qualified person. So you as the permittee are required to have a qualified person do an inspection of all of your ENS controls on your project on a weekly basis or after a measurable rainfall event. And what DEP did is they actually defined what that measurable event is. That is a quarter of an inch within 24 hours. You're required to have a piece of paper that says this qualified person went out and inspected my site and said that my ENS controls are still operational and functioning. What's a qualified person? Good question. DEP actually made in their Clean Water Academy a qualified persons course. So this was like I believe it was a 1 or 2 hour kind of webinar video that you could watch and become a qualified person to do that. I would say most of our clients put this back on the contractor since it was still in construction, that they were required as co-permittees to provide the service to them. But again, something that you should be checking to make sure that your contractor is providing that. Other thing, we had a lot of updated forms. So again, if you go under DP's website, they have a lot of forms there. They updated a lot of the forms that we have to do. One of those was actually a new visual site inspection form that is you're supposed to use for these on-site inspections. So it was no longer just kind of do what you wanted to use the conservation district form. DEP standardized it statewide. Specifically in the central part of the state in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, based on some, we'll say, settlements with EPA, any site that drains to the Chesapeake Bay, so Susquehanna River Basin, you are required to use ABECT only. That is the available best and current technologies. So prime example of that is you're not allowed to use silt fence anymore in central Pennsylvania. You have to use filter sock with compost inside of it to act as a filtering agent. So again, it just changed how we design projects a little bit. We had to change our details on the plans, and it changed what the contractors have to provide for you in the field. So that's stuff that's already be incorporated. All right. So what's now happened since Labor Day of this year? Well, again, there have been no regulatory changes since 2012, so the state law has not changed, but DEP has again updated checklist forms, application preferences, standing operating procedure, and guidance documents that have put a lot more changes in our plate. And some of these actually happened in 2023. So one of the big things that happened in 2023 is DEP updated their instructions for how we fill out some of the worksheets. Hidden in those instructions was a requirement that if we want to take an evapotranspiration credit, which that credit actually reduces or it actually increases the volume that a best management practice or stormwater control measure provides by about 10 to 15%. So anytime we have vegetation in the bottom of a rain garden or a pond, we get that plant uptake credit in the evapotranspiration requirements there. One of the requirements I started to do was to get that vegetated credit, you actually have to put plugs of woody and herbaceous, and that for me, as an engineer to know woody and herbaceous differences, you have to put woody and herbaceous plant plugs in the bottom of those facilities. Typically, we were only seeding those with either a rain garden mix or some type of native seed mix. DEP says, no, you actually have to plug these now. So, Mark, I don't know if you would talk through the cost implications of that or just or why we're doing that.
I mean, so what we saw before that became a requirement, what we were seeing was just the lack of stability. You'd have a rain event, your seed would wash, you wouldn't actually be achieving the outcome that DEP was providing credits for. The notion of a rooted plant material ultimately establishing and being able to perform the way it was anticipated under the permit requirements is what's driving that. There is definitely a cost implication, and that's even just the guiding documents and the changes that occur in these guiding documents. Filter sock's a good example. Much cheaper to install silt fence, but the outcome and the blowouts and the challenges that were occurring with that is part of what Glenn was referring to with the EPA resolution with DEP. So the way these changes occur is what catches everybody off guard. Suddenly there's a document change. You think that's rather innocuous, but at the end of the day, when you start peeling back the layers of it, you begin to see the cost implications, the permit implications, the project progress implications, stuff that's already either approved or under construction. Now all of a sudden you're not getting approvals because you can't get released because there's been a document or a process change. That's the frustrating piece that designers, builders, developers, homeowners are ultimately challenged by. So I could rant for a while, but this is why
Yeah.
Len doesn't let me talk.
So one of the other big things was, and this was not something DEP did, but they just made everyone aware of it, that all general permits in the entire state expire in December 7th, 2024. That is because the state's permit with the federal government expires on the same date. So they actually have to renew their permit, which means you have to renew your permit. And they also released a draft new PCSM BMP manual, which had some major impacts to development. So we'll kind of talk through some of those for those of you who are now planning projects that are going to be designed and or construction in 2025, 2026. So, well, one of the big things here is, we're in the final countdown. We only have a little over a month and a half here to get every single general permit in the state in for renewal if the permit is still active. I can tell you right now, we have hundreds, just as one firm have hundreds of permits that we are renewing between now and December 7th. So you actually have two options here. You could, one, if you're done with your project and everything is converted to what was on the permit, so all of your stormwater facilities went from an E&S facility now to their post-construction condition. You have great vegetation. You've built every house, every building, everything is stabilized. You can submit for a notice of termination and you can start that process. You can actually get off of your permit and you don't have to renew. The other option is you have to renew your current permit. And when you renew your current permit, you are actually accepting all of the new permit conditions that were not even part of your permit from your, what we call a 2019 permit. So the last version of the general permit was in 2019. So you're not just accepting the 2019 permit conditions, you're now accepting all of the new 2024 permit conditions. So what changed? Well, I would say there were 5 major ones that every developer and every builder should know about, that are changes from the 2024 renewals. So starting, they're actually going to give you a 12-month grace period, but anytime you now convert a erosion and sediment control BMP to a PCSM BMP, or you install a post-construction rain garden infiltration facility, you are going to be required to do during construction infiltration testing to confirm that your design infiltration rate is actually being met in your constructed facility. So again, if you convert prior to December of 2025, that's not a requirement. But if you convert if you start converting in 2026, you are going to be required to have that infiltration done. So again, an added cost, something that may not be in your pro forma or your budget right now, that you're going to have to then accommodate. You are required, and this is starting, if you renew your permit today, your first inspection report is due December of this year, December 31st of this year. You're required to submit an inspection report every month. You as a permitter are required to provide photos and a form to DEP for every one of your sites and every one of your stormwater facilities on whether it's an E&S or PCSM condition and what the current condition of that is. Vegetated condition, is it being maintained, things like that. It's going to be a monthly log and monthly form that you submit to the conservation district. You were then also required, starting next year, December 8th of 2025, you're required to provide an annual report. In that annual report, it will be a summary of everything that's happened over the course of the year, the progress you've made on your NPDES permit, and what your plan is to close out the permit, what your timeline is. Are you going to be done the next year, next 6 months, whatever they want to know. But you're also required to then submit both monthly and annual reports starting next year. You have to have a qualified person for doing these inspections. Now, qualified's changed. I have it in air quotes. We'll kind of talk through that. The PCSM installation. So even since 2012, any structural PCSM BMP requires a licensed professional to observe the critical stages of construction. That's been a requirement now for 12 years. What is new is typically we will go out, we will do inspections, and we don't submit anything to the department or the conservation district until we submit the NOT. So there could be a 1 year to 5 year to 10-year lag between when a facility is actually converted and to when we officially close out that BMP as part of the NPDES permit. Well, now with the changes to these new forms, anytime we convert a PCSM BMP, the licensed professional providing professional oversight is required to give an installation certificate to the conservation district within 30 days of the actual conversion. So that's also important to know, because you have to then, one, your engineer needs to know that, or your licensed professional needs to know that, and two, you need to make sure that they are following up and doing that, and make sure it's in their scope of work to provide that. So along with all of the things that are required for these renewals, what are required now for new permits? Let's just say you're about to submit a new project. What's now required? There is very heavy language in the instructions of the notice of intent, your application for an NPDES permit, that strongly suggests that you should submit an ESA phase 1 for your project. Now, I will say typically, I would say about 90% of our projects, if they're bank financed, the bank is already asking for an ESA from our developers. But it's kind of a first for us, where there aren't Act 2 or soil contamination issues on a project, that we're providing these environmental assessments to DEP as part of our NPDES permitting process. So that's kind of a big change. It impacts workflows and timelines. If you're going to submit an ESA as part of your NPDES submission, make sure you're doing that upfront with feasibility, so we all understand that. The offsite discharge analysis is now an offsite erosion potential analysis. I find, based on the guidance, that it is a much heavier lift from a technical perspective, much more analysis that needs to be done. And that is an analysis from the discharge from your parcel down to a regulated watercourse, bank or wetland. So you could cross one property, you could cross 2, 3, 4, 5. You're providing some stability analysis on the flow path of your water from your site down to surface waters. Again, offsite, we don't necessarily have survey. We don't have pictures of offsite areas because they're not always accessible, because it's private property, but that is also now a requirement to provide. There are also a pre-development site characterization. So right now, as the current BMP manual is written, pre 2012, it is required to have 4 to 6 tests per 1 acre of facility footprint. So, you may have, and that's about a day's work for a geotech. They can typically do anywhere between 6 and 10 infiltration tests in a day, depending on your site and staffing and things like that. Well, the new requirement that is proposed within the draft PCSM documents are 1 test per 40,000 square foot of the total project area. So it's not even if your development area, let's just say you have a 100-acre parcel, and let's say you only want to develop on 5 acres. It doesn't say you just test in those 5 acres. It says you need to test in the entirety of your parcel or your land holdings to make sure that your development is being placed, and your stormwater is being placed in the most accepting for stormwater. So this is one of those things that we're going to have to talk through. I will say, I just checked DEP's website yesterday, and there was a change to the website that I noticed that between now and, I believe, March of 2025, you can still use the old Module 1 and Module 2, the 2019 Module 1 and Module 2. So they've given you kind of a 4-month grace period here to still use the old testing criteria. But that is coming. That is going to be a major expense here when you start planning out projects that are going to start development or start design and development here in 2025 and 2026. So geotechnical costs will definitely go up, but it's something you're going to want to consider here when you're doing your performas. All right, upcoming changes. So what are some of the upcoming changes that we're hearing or kind of talking through? So everyone knows, or most people should know, that DEP last year put out a draft manual, a revision to the design manual. And I will say this was long overdue. We've been working with the same guidance document for it's somewhere between 10 and 15 years. I had to go back and look at the exact date. And a lot of things have changed. Even the forms, the forms that we use aren't even reflected correctly in the manual. So DEP's done a great job. They're working with Villanova and a couple other agencies here to do this draft document. So it is 755 pages long with all the changes and all the input from the different stakeholders. Now 755 pages. So it requires a public comment period. There are specific potential impacts to land development here, and there are specific special requirements for residential development. So a lot of times we get review comments from DEP. It's always fun to play the Uno reversi card on them. And we submitted a 17-page document outlining our questions, comments, and opinions with respect to the new guidance as it relates to our land development clients. So there's a lot of feedback back and forth between stakeholders and DEP on what the final version of this is going to look like. It's not projected to be out until sometime the end of 2025 or beginning of 2026, just based on the sheer number of thousands of comments that DEP received and has to respond to. So what are impacts to residential construction? Obviously, something here that this group is very keenly focused on. Right now, the way it is written and the way even Module 2 is right now for the current NPDES permit, you're required to design to 110% of your projected impervious coverage. This then covers those future pool additions, patio additions, deck additions, things like that, that would put a normal approved permit over the line as far as maximum impervious coverage. Or you have to design for maximum coverage of zoning. So just when you're doing your performas and you're talking to your different industry groups, remember 110%. So at a minimum, all of your stormwater costs are going to be proportionally at least 10% greater, because we're designing for a larger footprint of impervious on a lot. So again, deed restrictions against future impervious and things like that. So general areas of concern, the offsite erosion potential, again, it's going to be costly. It's an added cost as part of the developer side of this. You're also required that if you discharge to a municipal storm drain, you're going to be required to get the municipality to sign off on MS4 discharge. So it's another layer of approvals and a signature you're going to have to get from the township. It's just a lot more coordination, another kind of pain point through the process here when working with the municipalities. Generally speaking, we believe the geotech requirement is going to be 3 to 7 times more expensive than they currently are. Because remember, we're going out 3 times. We're going out to do an initial feasibility. We're going out to do testing during design when we know the elevations of the facility, and then a 3rd time during construction. So there are some costs associated with that you need to be made aware of. Again, so the licensed professional on site right now, we're out there for critical stages of observation. Those could be 1 or 2 hour check-in points on those critical points during construction. The way the draft is written, they would want a licensed professional out there for days on end, watching the embankment construction and things like that. So there's still some things to be worked out here with DEP on what that's going to look like, but there are great impacts to residential construction. Some of the other things that are going to be in there is a function-based stream assessment for offsite discharges. Again, something we don't do now, but it's something that's going to be an environmental assessment of the downstream properties. Right now, in the draft, there is a 50-foot minimum buffer from all wetlands, which, again, it might be an illegal taking of land depending on who you ask in the regulated community, but just be aware that that is currently in there in the environmental impacts area of the draft document. So could have huge implications for residential development. Dewatering times have been lowered, which means facilities have to get larger in footprint, which means you're going to have less developable land for your residential developments. Excuse me. It's also required to have multiple professionals on every project. Right now, we have typically a PE, an RLA, a surveyor, and a geotech. Under the current draft of the manual, you would also need potentially a hydrogeologist and a soil scientist, which is interesting because soil scientists aren't certified or licensed in our state. So that one is a bit questioning. So geotech requirements, I'm not going to go over these, but there are significant requirements here and significant differences in what is currently required and what will be required in the draft ordinance or the draft manual. So something to understand and understand the cost implications of that. So it seems like a lot. How did we get here? There's a lot of stakeholders, right? So the regulated community, U.S. developers have given a lot of feedback to DP. Here's the problems we've had the last 5-10 years with closing out these permits. Or contractors, hey, look, we can't get these facilities to drain. I don't understand what's happening. Homeowners and even the regulators, so conservation districts or DEP themselves, they're giving feedback into processes. So DEP, to their credit, it is not easy to hit everyone's goals, right? If they do something on one side, the environmental groups come after them. They do something, the environmental groups and developers are arguing and complaining about it. So they're trying to best accommodate everyone and have their eye towards what's best for the environment here. So they're doing a great job. They're doing the best they can, but some of this stuff is gonna have to kind of push the other way. But some of these changes are being dictated by the federal government on our Commonwealth, just based on our permitting and some of our noncompliance with the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So from my perspective, DEP is really trying here. They're doing the best they can, but there's still obviously some room for improvement and some changes need to be made so that we can still have some affordable housing here in the Commonwealth and not drastically impact development. Potential upcoming changes. There are changes in draft format right now for the NRT project. DEP is removing the release of liability for co-permittees. So the release of a contractor from their liability on the NPDES permit will have to be handled through a contract between the developer and the contractor. DEP is no longer going to be the arbiter of when someone's off of their permit and they're no longer liable. The sample language of the PCSM instrument, which someone asked about earlier, is currently being modified, and DEP is going to be providing some sample language. With our clients, we work with their counsel, and we actually put language within the HOA documents that, again, requires members to comply with all NPDES paperwork and things like that. One of our partner, our project attorneys, has actually given some draft language to DEP that they can then revise their documents, and DEP will be sharing with that in the future. And for those engineers in the room, we are currently working through some modifications to design criteria for the managed release concept. In my opinion, some good, some bad. Still working some of that out, but there will be some significant changes to the crediting and design of MRC facilities here in the upcoming months. I understand that was a lot. What was actually going to happen here in the next couple months, I can't predict the future. Again, I'm seeing a lot of drafts of things, and I hear a lot of things, but we're going to keep moving. Things are going to keep progressing. All I can say is regulations and rules are going to keep changing, and it's important to have open communication between developers and their designers and their engineers to understand what those changes are and kind of pivot and make sure that your project can still be a success and get you to the finish line through permitting.